It's hard to find any other character that has quite as much mystery, importance, and misunderstandings in a story than the Skull Knight from Berserk. Of course, when you have a character that looks like this, a huge bodybuilder-looking skeleton man with spikes everywhere, sword and shield in hand, and on top of this demonic-looking horse, well, he better be either a final boss or an extremely important entity in the story. And he definitely is. A few years ago, you may recall I released a video about everything known so far about the Skull Knight. I have not actually gone back to rewatch that video, but I'm sure there is a bunch more information that we could add to it now. But this isn't going to be a remake of that video or an updated version. This is going to be talking about the purpose of Skull Knight within the story and what his actions say about his true intentions when it comes to his goals, desires, and the reason why he's helped Guts out multiple times. See, Skull Knight is one of those types of characters that I don't even know if there is a proper term for. He's the type of character that is not the focus of the story and only comes into it on occasion, but every single time that he does appear, you know either some shit is about to go down or some big bombshell of information is about to be dropped. This adds so much to the narrative and makes Skull Knight one of, if not the most exciting character to see every time he returns within the story. You get to that page turn and then you see Skull Daddy standing there with his expressionless face and you know that this is about to be important. This is where we need to pay attention. He's that little wild card. That little bit of extra flavor that anytime Miura needed to spice things up or propel us forward a little bit more in the narrative, bam, dash of Skull Knight was thrown in to do the trick. Taste them bones on your lips while you discover what terrifying revelation is coming up next. Skull Knight is incredibly important for what he symbolizes, mostly for the character of Guts. He is a cautionary tale, an example of what could happen to Guts. And no, we are not going to be entertaining any Skull Knight is Guts from the future theories here. Look, just go have fun with it, enjoy it, just not here. We're not going to do that. But Skull Knight does represent something that could happen within Guts, an example of the ultimate fate of one who truly gives in to their darkness and rage. Much of the story of Berserk revolves around recovery from trauma. This is never spoon-fed to you as a reader, but this is something that you come to understand through reading it the same way that Guts himself comes to these understandings as he goes through his journey. You have to see the struggles, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the pain, the battles, the uncertainty, and through all of that, it builds the Beast of Darkness. Guts is pure human, and so he is a product of all of his life's circumstances. It is not Guts' fault for the things that have happened to him, but those things build within his mind and creates pain and chaos within him. And all of his darkness, all of our darkness, everybody experiences this. It's something that is a part of us, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. But now this darkness within us, this shadow self, it can either take us over completely if we submit ourselves into it, or we can rechannel that energy and use it to our advantage when the moment arises when it could be useful. The Berserker armor is a representation of that, a vessel that brings the darkness to the surface to be utilized in extremely dire situations, and there is a way to master that armor. But the armor can also allow that inner beast so much control that your ego begins to slip away. This is the deeper lesson that I think personally, most of these things are going to be my opinion, so just bear with that. But I believe Miura was trying to represent this amidst all of the amazing battle scenes. But we know and have full confirmation that not only did Skull Knight possess the armor before Guts, but that it was also the cause of his death. Somehow, what was left of Skull Knight's essence, what was left of his soul perhaps, was transferred into the armor that he currently wears. He's sort of like Alphonse from Full Metal Alchemist, though in this case, most of what he was as a human is now gone. Instead, all that is left is a vengeful feeling that he had upon his death, something we caught a glimpse of in Chapter 362. Honestly, the drop of Chapter 362 was one of my fondest memories being a Berserk fan. It was such a gigantic reveal, and the entire community was ecstatic. Everyone talked about it and theorized about it for weeks, and it was just truly an amazing time. But anyway, within that flashback, we saw the events that led towards his death. We saw an eclipse-like event, the death of a woman in his arms, and the rise of the God Hand Void, along with 4 other God Hand members that we have never seen before. In traditional Berserk fashion, while answering one question, we open the door to dozens more. But shortly after, Skull Knight admits that this was the end of a foolish king, and that even though he goes through the motions of visiting the grave of his former lover, there is no emotion left to be had here. He is blank. He is unable to feel and unable to grieve. As he admits to himself, all he is the remnants of a grudge. That man he was 1,000 years ago is gone. This is why Skull Knight speaks so cryptically and robotically, his blank skull helmet representative of the lingering soul that resides inside of it. Practically nothing. His humanity lost, and only vengeance remains. And this is also the potential outcome for Guts. I believe that Skull Knight recognizes Guts' place in this world, or rather lack of. That he was a child meant to die, a man on the verge of death almost his entire existence, but yet continues to live. The first appearance of Skull Knight is when he walks up to Guts after Guts had just left the Band of the Hawk. He warns Guts of the oncoming eclipse, and that if this storm of death didn't kill him, it would break any normal man or woman mentally to witness the hell-like chaos of this feast. But to struggle, to endure, to contend, this is the sort of one who defies that death, meaning the only way to keep on living is to keep on fighting, to not give in to that trauma and pain that will befall you. It's the only kind of cryptic motivation Skull Knight could possibly give. Some have questioned how Skull Knight knew who Guts was and why he decided to visit him here. I would say he was probably tracking the Crimson Bailet and was keeping an eye on it, probably learning about Guts as time went by. But there's more to this that's important. And that is Skull Knight and causality. Skull Knight is aware that time is very much like a spiral, repeating itself with various minute differences that can lead to new outcomes. He knows that 216-year time will be up for the eclipse. He just has to be there when it happens. See, Skull Knight did not care about stopping the eclipse. The warning he gave Guts was just that, to be prepared for something bad. But there was no intention of not letting that bad thing happen. Skull Knight needed the eclipse to happen so that he could gain access into the deeper levels of the astral world and come face to face with the God Hand. Don't forget that Skull Knight managed to save Rickert from an apostle attack, but then he did not kill those apostles. As somebody who self-declares himself to be a foe of the Inhumans, why not just dispatch them? He definitely has the power to, because I bet that he was tracking them on their way to the eventual location of the eclipse itself. This leads us to the ultimate question, though. How good is Skull Knight? But my question back to that is, does the capacity for good or evil even exist within Skull Knight at all at this point? To warn Guts may be an act of compassion, but it could also potentially further Skull Knight's own goals. To have another struggler make it through and gain another man who would want to wage war on the God Hand. That could only help his cause. So my theory is not that Skull Knight is making decisions based on good or evil or righteousness, but that he's making them based on the only thing that he can, which is vengeance. When Skull Knight breaks into the eclipse, he immediately attacks Void, who deflects his attack. After that, he runs down to rescue Guts and Casca, but maybe because he realized that even at his level of power, he would not be able to take on all 5 God Hand members single-handedly. I also believe saving Guts and Casca holds a high significance. Within the eclipse that Skull Knight endured, it seems to imply that he lost the woman that he loved, which helped propel his rage into the point where the Berserker armor killed him. It could be possible that seeing that similarity here with his and Guts' suffering, that he wanted Casca alive too, because she helps to quell that darkness within Guts. Maybe her continued existence would prevent the same thing happening twice, thus changing fate just enough to turn the tides in his favor. Or maybe he was just compelled to do it. See, not long after this, he also saves Luca from falling at the Tower of Conviction. But there's no direct benefit for him doing that if his goal is to just kill the God Hand. Perhaps him saving her was instinctual. Maybe deep within whatever is left of him, he wishes to be able to save the woman that he loved, and therefore, without even thinking about it, he went to save a woman that was in danger. I'm not sure if this was the case or intended at this point at all, but it's something to think about. And of course, we can't forget the gigantic factoid that Skull Knight is about 99.9% confirmed to be the former King Geyserek, a legendary ruler who once united all kingdoms under one banner. His former fallen kingdom, which is now Falconia under Griffith's rule, was a thriving, prosperous nation, but very little has ever been revealed about that actual time period. There's confirmation that Skull Knight was friends with the witch Flora, and she seems to be a genuinely good person and also remembers him fondly, so this leads more evidence to him being a good man, though his story is that he began living too lavishly and eventually 4 angels came to destroy his city in penance. Which of course could mean that 4 God Hand members showed up at the request of whoever Void was at the time, and he sacrificed the kingdom. This could be what they saw in the flashback scene, but all we really know is that the background was in flames, also in the shape of the brand. But also remember that when Skull Knight spoke to Guts in the Conviction arc, he knew about the incarnation ceremony, which also used a similar brand of flames in the village. Whatever the case, that event was the end of a foolish king. Maybe foolish for trusting Void, maybe foolish for becoming a bad ruler over time, or maybe foolish for allowing his darkness to overtake him. We still don't know, but what we can say is that Geyserek essentially died that day, and this is what was left over. The most unfortunate thing about Skull Knight is that despite his constant best efforts to slay the God Hand and fight against Causality, it seems as though he consistently plays into Causality's plan inadvertently. He spent God knows how many years swallowing a bunch of Baylets so that he could repurpose them into an ultimate weapon, the Sword of Resonance, a weapon capable of slicing through dimensions and opening a portal straight into the abyss, a massively powerful weapon he created specifically for the purpose of sending the God Hand straight to hell. And even though he had the perfect opportunity, Femto had his back turned, Skull Daddy was right there, but Femto manipulated space-time or some shit, I don't know, and caught the sword swipe and then used it for his own means, which basically plummeted the entire planet into the astral world, and now monsters ravage the Earth. So, good one, Skull Knight. But that's just the thing. Femto knew that he would be there, and he knew about his weapon. Causality set this up to happen. What's even worse is Skull Knight first used the weapon to get him and Guts out of Clip-Off. It could be that using it here for the first time made the God Hand aware of its existence, or using it here for the first time maybe weakened its effects, so it wasn't as strong when he went to use it the second time. We don't know, but whatever the case, it didn't work, and he played right into their hands. It's astounding with how powerful the Skull Knight is, how badass he's presented to be, and yet he is cursed not to be able to do the one and only thing that he desires. Cursed to walk the earth for 1,000 years now, hungry for the revenge that he himself will probably never get. And even if he did, to what extent would he actually be able to feel satisfaction in this near emotionless state of being that he is in? Like the skeleton vessel that carries him around, he in many ways is essentially just a dead man walking aimlessly into the night. It is a truly tragic story to behold, and it's not even the main story of the manga. This is the most impressive thing about the character to me. He is so vitally important to understanding everything, and yet he remains this enigma. We guess and we speculate and we theorize, but at the end of the day, all we have is a few bits of evidence that have been shared, and a painful feeling of loss, fighting for a redemption of a long-lost era of time that's never coming back and never will be the same again.